Hey folks, welcome back to the channel, and in this video we are going to be doing one of the playoff previews for the Blast Austin Major, and we will be kicking things off with the first quarterfinals matchup that will be played in the tournament, and that will of course be paiN taking on Furia, a bit of a Brazilian brawl, but obviously with a little bit of different flavor to it as Furia has kind of transitioned into more of an international roster in recent times. Now, before I get into this preview, if you folks aren't already, please do subscribe to the channel. It really does help grow things here quite a lot as I'm trying to build this channel up as we're trying to approach that 5,000 subscriber mark, so all the subs really help. Also, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below as well, and get involved in discussion. All these things help feed the algorithm and help this channel grow, and so if you wouldn't mind doing that, I would really appreciate it. But without further ado, let's get into this one as I'm trying to make these pretty quick and snappy, and we'll start by just kind of talking a little bit about paiN. So paiN is a team that is difficult to put your finger on because they have been through a lot of roster changes and stand-in situations throughout the course of this first season of 2025. Obviously, they came off the back of last year, having made it to the elimination stage of the Shanghai Major, but unable to make it to the playoffs. They entered this year by placing top 8 in the Blast Bounty, by being able to get through the online qualifiers against the likes of Gamer Legion and FaZe, but then immediately getting knocked out in the main event portion by Na'Vi. From there, they were unable to qualify for Katowice, getting knocked out in the play-in, but then bounced back with a top 8 finish at PGL Cluj-Napoca, including getting some wins over Astralis and Falcons, taking a map off of Mongols, also beating Virtus.Probe, and ultimately losing to the eventual champions, mousesports, in the quarterfinals of that matchup. Now, in EPL, they were able to make it through stage 1, but once they got to the kind of main event, despite a win over Gamer Legion, they did get knocked out by G2 and Na'Vi. Then, of course, we did see them really start to struggle a bit, with PGL Bucharest coming in last place. The same could be said for IAM Melbourne, where they did have a stand-in for their in-game leader, Biguzera, which obviously was not ideal, so can't really count too much against them on that one. Then they had their first event with DGT, which was at Blast Rivals, but they got pretty quickly battered, losing to mousesports and Wildcard to get knocked out of that in last place as well. Then, of course, PGL Astana was a weird situation where they did not have DGT for the first few games that they played at that tournament, once again having to deal with stand-in situations, and they wound up finishing that event in a pretty low placement as well. One thing I've respected about this team, though, is that they have at times with the core of their team been able to get some decent results, at least some top 8 finishes, things of that nature, at times be able to get wins over teams like VP and Gamer Legion and Falcons and Astralis and some pretty solid teams, and even take maps off of some of the elite teams. So they do have an ability to perform at a pretty decent level. So far at the Major, at stage 2, they got through that one pretty quickly, beating Namiga and Furia 2-0 right off the rip. Had a loss to Virtus.Pro quite quickly after that, but then were able to beat LinVision to move on. Then when you get to stage 3, it was a little bit more of a labored effort, losing their opening best of ones against Spirit and G2, but then being able to run it all the way back, beating Namiga, 3D Max, and Virtus.Pro in the best of 3s to make it into the playoffs. When you take a look at the map pool for paiN, it is a little bit tough to really read just where their strengths lie, again, due to all of the roster changes and the stand-in situations. DusT 2 has been by far their most played map, with 9 games already having been played with their full 5, with a 5-4 record. Then after that, it's pretty slim pickings. 2-2 on Inferno, 2-2 on Nuke, 1-2 on Anubis, 1-2 on Mirage. They've only played 1 game each on Ancient and Train, and having lost both of those games. They haven't really historically ever played Ancient. It used to be a permaban of theirs, but after having some struggles with the core of this team on Train, they have really kind of pivoted more that direction. And they have a history of being pretty good on a map like Nuke, and they've had some history on DusT 2 and Mirage as well, but all in all, it's a little bit hit or miss. Now, to kind of wrap things up when it comes to paiN, again, this is a team I've always respected as being willing to go for the big upgrades whenever they become available, or at least making some type of strides forward in increasing the overall firepower of the team. I do think that NQZ has been a very solid opper for this team for quite some time. He's been one of their most consistent players and one of the few opping prospects to come out of Brazil in recent times. I think DGT was an absolute stud when he was playing on 9Z last year when they had some of their crazy runs at a couple of big tournaments, and I always knew that when he kind of benched himself on that team that he would eventually find himself on a higher caliber team, and paiN has been a pretty good home for him to really get to play his roles and play to his strengths, and he alongside NQZ have been kind of the bedrock of this team whenever they have been able to play with their full five. I think Davideus has been a little bit hit or miss, but he did represent an ability to get an upgrade in the entry rifling department when they moved on from Lux. And I will say he has been heating up in Austin. He has been really big, as I said earlier, in some of their key games. His entry success on the T side is a little bit lower compared to his peers in the playoffs, but his overall play has definitely shown some highlights in the big games. Now, I will say Big Uzera, he has had a little bit more of a struggle, if we're honest, this year. He was really known as a solid fragging IGL in 2024, a guy who could entry, a guy who could aggressively lurk, just a playmaker. Like, you would put him in the same conversation as a Blitz, for example, as one of the big fragging IGLs out there. But this year, he has really struggled to be able to live up to that same number, and you wonder how much of it has to do with him having to embed new players in the team, you know, like Davideus and like DGT, and then obviously having to sit out a tournament. Really hard to pin a finger on why exactly he hasn't performed at the same level, but he's definitely an X-Factor type guy. If he can get back into shape for these playoffs, that he could be that extra piece of talent that helps push him over the edge. And then when it comes to Snow, I'll be honest, he did look like a prospect when they picked him up. Again, pretty savvy of paiN to be able to go after a guy like this, but he just really hasn't panned out, to be honest. I just really feel like his play, on average, has been below what they were hoping for. He can certainly have his pop-off moments and, you know, his big games here and there, but doesn't nearly have the same level of consistency as an NQZ or a DGT. And really, Davideus has shown a little bit more growth, in my opinion, on this team in comparison to Stowe. And again, I think paiN have been crafty. Obviously, in an ideal world, they would have gone after an Insani or a Dumao or some type of heavy hitter like that, but under the restrictions that they have been dealing with, I feel like they have done pretty well, and they've made a pretty good showing of themselves so far in Austin. But now we have to get to their opponent, and of course, that is Furia. Now, Furia obviously made the crazy move coming into some of the latter matches of this first portion of the 2025 season by going international, seeing the benching of Cello as well as Skulls, and then bringing in Yakindar and Maladoy, with Fallen moving into a rifling IGL role and letting Maladoy have the AWP, and then Yakindar being given kind of another opportunity after being sitting on the bench of Liquid after a pretty rough showing of form from him for quite some time. They have tried to see if he could revitalize his career on this new look international Furia, and we really don't have a whole lot to go off of with Furia. They've only played a handful of events coming into these playoffs. Of course, we saw them debut at PGL Astana, where they actually had a pretty damn good run. Their opening game against Mongols, they were able to take a map off of them. They beat Gamer Legion, a team that has been sitting around the top 10 of the world going into that event. Then they were able to handle their Brazilian brethren in some matchups. They beat Made in Brazil twice, as well as Audic, and then ultimately lost in the semifinals to Spirit, but did take a map off of them in the process, and so really came out the gate swinging. We really saw Maladoy looking like a really sharp opper, Queserado remaining a star level player, Yuri even finding a little bit more freedom and form in that as well. And then Yakindar, while he was struggling a little bit on the entry front, he was their best CT player throughout the course of that tournament, and Fallen actually doing pretty well as an entry rifling IGL through a lot of that event, putting up some pretty damn good numbers. Now, Dallas, things kind of come crashing back down to earth with a 9th to 12th place finish, getting cleaned by Mongols that time around 0-2. But they were able to get a win over Linvision, take a map off of Gamer Legion, and at least put a little bit of something out there, but ultimately were nowhere near the playoffs. However, they have entered this major and have been banging. In Stage 2, they went 3-1, winning against Linvision in the opening game, taking a loss to paiN, but then bouncing back rather quickly against M80 and bait. And then in Stage 3, they did the unthinkable by going a 3-0 against a pretty tough schedule. They were able to get the win over Mongols right off the bat. Then they were able to get a big win over Aurora on DusT 2. And then they took care of Virtus Pro, a team that had been pretty fiery in this major. 2-0 against them with big wins on Mirage and Train. And so their wins were pretty damn big in most cases, other than the close one to Mongols. But nonetheless, a 3-0 is a 3-0. And so they come into this thing as one of the top seeds. When it comes to the map pool of Furia, they have clearly shown strengths on two key maps, which is Train and Anubis. 6-1 record on Train, 5-2 record on Anubis. They've also done decently for themselves on DusT 2 with a 4-2 record there. Yes, you can argue some of this is against weaker opposition, I will admit, but you forget that they did get some wins over Spirit and VP on Train, so at least a couple of decent wins on that particular map. They've also gotten some wins over Mongols and Gamer Legion on Anubis, so at times being able to beat some of the best in the world. On DusT 2, with that 4-2 record, I will admit most of their wins are against weaker opposition, but they have some wins over bait and Aurora, so not too shabby. Inferno, 2-2 record. One of the wins was against Mongols, but also lost to Mongols and Aurora in that process. Then we have a map like Nuke with a 3-2 record, where they have some wins over Gamer Legion, Main Brazil, and Linvision, but then some losses to Spirit and Gamer Legion, so losses to solid teams, and also a couple of decent wins. And then really their weak point has been they obviously don't play Ancient, and then when it comes to Mirage, they have a 2-5 record, which is a really odd one, because they have big wins over pretty good teams in Gamer Legion and Virtus Pro, but then they have losses to Mongols multiple times, Gamer Legion, Spirit, and bait, and in all of those losses, they weren't really that competitive, to be honest, which makes it very hard to read exactly how good they are on that map, considering we've seen some hints of brilliance against some solid teams, but we've also seen them struggle in some of the other games that they have played. And to kind of wrap up some talk about Furia, again, Maladoy has been fantastic so far as a aggressive opper who can go for openings on both sides of the map, usually pretty good at doing it, and he's fairly consistent. Obviously, his limited experience is something that is going to come up as a potential con, especially with the pressure of a major playoffs on the horizon. But I will say I was impressed with the fact that he handled the ability of playing in front of a big crowd in his home city in Astana, even took the mic from the interview in a couple of situations and spoke directly to the crowd, and kind of really thrived in that environment. That was his first really big LAN. This guy came from obscurity and was able to, in his first international LAN, get into a big stadium with a big crowd and actually put up some pretty solid performances. So I think Maladoy, so far so good. He's passed every test put in front of him for the most part. He definitely is going to be a vital tool for them in this matchup. Queserado, again, still very much a star player, as he has been for quite some time, has been a big playmaker on the T side in this roster. You see him going for more openings these days and has had a very good success in those opening duels on the T side, going for nearly 20% of the team's opening duels and winning them about 54% of the time. He's also a big trade fragger, even when he's not going for openings, and he's been big on the CT side. Yuri has also been solid in this iteration of Furia. We've seen this guy be a great trader on the T side in particular. He's been able to take some more of the passive roles on the team, with guys like Yakindar and Fallen being more of the aggressors, Queserado being that flex rifler, Maladoy being an aggressive opper. It's allowed Yuri to take a little bit more of a backseat, but have the ability to come in on the executes and still be a pretty solid trade fragger. Yakindar's also been pretty solid on this team, I must say. I think early on he was struggling a little bit with the entry role on the T side with the success rate, but you know, he's really been growing into it. He's taking 34% of their opening attempts on the T side and has now at a 46% success rate, which is pretty damn good. And he's also always been one of their best CT players throughout all of the LAN matches they have played so far with this lineup. And then Fallen, look, his overall numbers are not going to jump off the page, but we never really expected him to begin with. But what I will say is that he's had some pretty solid T-side entry stats. He was going for a lot of them in Astana, and he was winning over half of them. That number has come down a bit as they've been a little bit more reliant upon Maladoy creating those openings with the op, or Yakindar being that pure entry rifler, or even Cacerado at times taking that. But still, Fawn is around the 17% opening attempt rate on the T side, and he is 150% of them. I think the big thing for Fawn is still adapting to those anchor roles on the CT side, and that is going to be something to kind of keep an eye on to determine what the long-term future of this team is really going to be. But so far in Austin, it's been pretty damn impressive. Now, head-to-head, there's really not too much to speak of on this matchup. They've only played against each other once. That was in stage 2 of this major on DusT 2, where paiN was able to win 13-11, had a 5-round CT half, but then came back and won 8 rounds on the T side in the second half to win that out. Now, as far as how this veto is going to go, we can kind of take a look at this team's bans. And when it comes to a team like paiN, they have in the past been an ancient banner, but they have really pivoted more to banning Train here lately, which is perfect for them because that is a map that Furia are very strong on. So getting rid of that tool is going to be pretty big. When you go to Furia, they are a team that bans ancient quite a lot in their own right. And that's obviously going to help out paiN because they really don't want to play that map anyway. So when it comes to the bans, paiN does get a bit of a slight edge in that regard as they're basically seeing 2 of the maps they don't want to play likely getting rid of in the rotation. When it comes to the picks, I think paiN is a team that really could be leaning more towards a map like DusT 2 or Mirage. It hasn't been a big pick for them in the past, but we have seen them being willing to play DusT 2 a little bit more lately. But obviously, Mirage and Nuke are the maps that more than likely you'd expect them to go for. And so that's kind of what I'm expecting. And historically, when you look at a map like Nuke that has been kind of paiN's bread and butter, though lately they've just been playing a lot more DusT 2 since they've been able to get the full 5 together with DGT. So I could see it kind of going multiple directions. I mean, Mirage has been a weak point record-wise for Furia, so I could see paiN, again, going with a classic Nuke, but I could also see them maybe target a map like Mirage if they feel Furia is weak there, or maybe even look to replay DusT 2, a map they have already beaten this Furia roster on. Now, with Train being gone, I do think Furia will likely attack into Anubis. I think that is a map that they have looked the sharpest on outside of Train, but it is a map that paiN are capable of playing. They also could look to go in the direction of a map like Inferno because it is a map that paiN have really struggled on in the past and still haven't shown a lot of great form on, though we did see them get some recent wins, I will say, over the likes of 3D Max and Mousesports, so that may be enough to deter them from going for that. So all more than likely, I think we are going to see an Anubis pick. And then as far as the third map, it could be a toss-up. I think it could be whatever is left over between DusT 2 and Mirage, depending on paiN's pick. And that's kind of where I'll leave it with that. Don't want to speculate too much further. And so that's kind of what these teams are looking like, what their records are, what the pick ban could be, all those sorts of things. At the end of the day, I do think that Furia look in better form and their players are impressing me a little bit more, but I know the core of this paiN team has been together for a long time, and we're starting to see them level up in Austin. They finally have their full 5 together. They're finally able to kind of stabilize, in a sense, with how they're approaching these maps and their roles. I do think NQZ and DGT have been very solid. My bigger concerns is just how does Davideus handle the big stage. You know, again, he was leveling up in stage 3 of this major, but he's been a little bit hit or miss. Snow has been a bit hit or miss for a while, and Big Uzera has really just struggled really this whole year individually. Meanwhile, you got a Furia who was looking fierce. They obviously had a great run at Astana. Dallas, not as great, but they have been great so far. In Austin, you're seeing Maladoy popping off. You're seeing Cacerado popping off. You're seeing Yakindar leveling up as each match passes. He's getting a little bit sharper and sharper, and they just seem to be in a better state right now from what I can tell. Both of these teams are going to be looking to play a very up-tempo, fiery play style, but I will say that both of these teams are also capable of some pretty elaborate, heavy set pieces with great utility usage and just a lot of confidence in playing together as a unit and going in and just trading. Obviously, both these teams can also get a little bit loose and scrappy, and also both of these teams don't have a ton of reps with their full fives coming into this, so I do expect it at times to probably get a little bit scrappy and fast in the early round situations and get a little bit chaotic, and when those things happen, either one of these teams could thrive in that chaos. It's really hard to pick a favorite in those moments. But if I had to choose a team to win this, it does seem like Furia are looking just a bit sharper. I think this is one of the harder matchups to call, in my opinion. But if I had to make a prediction, I probably would predict that Furia will be likely the ones to take this win. But either way, that's going to do it for this preview. I hope you folks enjoyed it. Again, if you did, make sure you subscribe, like, comment, all that jazz, and I'll see you for future quarterfinals previews soon.